In 1929, Bonnie Parker, a young woman from a modest family in Texas, worked as a waitress, hoping for a better life. One fateful day, she met Clyde Barrow, a man with a notorious criminal reputation, freshly escaped from prison. Clyde had already begun a life of crime, including bank robberies, and was well known to the authorities. Bonnie, captivated by his charm and rebellious nature, quickly found herself falling for him. Clyde, with his wit and daring personality, made Bonnie feel alive in a way she had never experienced. She abandoned her humble life and joined him, unwittingly beginning her descent into the world of crime. Once Bonnie joined Clyde, they quickly formed a team, with Clyde leading the way. Their first criminal acts were petty thefts, mainly targeting small businesses and gas stations. However, the thrill of the crime, combined with Bonnie's growing loyalty and skill, soon escalated their operations. They began robbing banks across Texas and surrounding states, carefully planning each heist. Bonnie, though initially just an accomplice, quickly proved her value, participating fully in the robberies. She carried a gun, learned to drive, and even took part in the gang's escape plans. Their criminal life, filled with adrenaline and danger, was now unstoppable. In 1931, Clyde and Bonnie's robberies became more daring. They hit banks in small towns, which were poorly guarded, making their escape easier. The couple worked in perfect synchrony. Clyde would break into the bank, demand cash, and keep an eye on the door. Meanwhile, Bonnie would be outside acting as a lookout, ready to warn him if law enforcement arrived. Their style was ruthless and quick. They gained a reputation for being one of the most feared criminal duos in the country. Their bank heists were methodical, and they never left a trail behind them, making it nearly impossible for the authorities to catch them. In 1933, Clyde's brother, Buck Barrow, and his wife Blanche joined the gang. They committed several robberies together, but tragedy struck during a violent gunfight in Iowa. The gang was ambushed by law enforcement, and Buck was severely wounded. Bonnie and Clyde rushed to get him medical attention, but the injury was too severe, and Buck succumbed to his wounds. His death hit Clyde hard, turning his vengeful and violent nature into overdrive. The Barrow gang's criminal activities became even more dangerous as they sought revenge and continued their rampage through the Midwest. On April 1st, 1934, after a failed robbery attempt in Joplin, Missouri, Bonnie and Clyde were pursued by law enforcement officers. The gang was cornered in a rural area, and a fierce gun battle ensued. Bonnie and Clyde killed 2 officers during the confrontation, marking a turning point in their crime spree. The shooting of law enforcement officers made the pair even more notorious. The American public was captivated by their daring crimes, but law enforcement was now determined to end their reign of terror. The shootout in Joplin was one of the bloodiest encounters between the Barrow gang and law enforcement. By 1934, Bonnie and Clyde were famous for their brutal crimes and daring escapes. The press fueled their infamy with stories of their robberies, shootouts, and violent encounters making headlines across the nation. They became icons of the Great Depression era, symbols of rebellion and the dangers of lawlessness. Despite their fame, law enforcement was closing in on them. The FBI and local police set up numerous roadblocks and traps, determined to end the reign of terror that Bonnie and Clyde had caused across the Midwest. On May 23, 1934, Bonnie and Clyde were ambushed by a posse of law enforcement officers in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. The officers, led by Frank Hamer, had been tracking the couple for months. As Bonnie and Clyde approached a remote area in their car, law enforcement officers opened fire, killing both of them instantly. The final ambush ended the reign of one of the most infamous criminal duos in American history. Their violent deaths were met with mixed emotions from the public. Some viewed them as tragic figures, while others saw them as ruthless criminals who got what they deserved. Bonnie and Clyde's story remains one of the most iconic in American criminal history. They became symbols of rebellion, their criminal exploits immortalized in books, movies, and songs. While some view them as tragic figures caught in the harsh grip of the Great Depression, others see them as ruthless criminals who ultimately paid the price for their violent lives. Bonnie and Clyde's reign of terror ended in a blaze of gunfire, leaving behind a legacy of love, crime, and violence. Their story serves as a stark reminder of how desperation and a desire for escape can lead to disastrous consequences. In the end, their crime spree ended not with a victory, but with death, cementing their place in the annals of criminal history. John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, was a man of two faces. On the surface, he was a successful businessman, well-liked in his community, and even performed at children's parties as a clown. But behind the facade of laughter and innocence, Gacy was a ruthless serial killer who preyed on young boys and men, luring them into his home with promises of work or money. He committed horrific acts of violence, leaving behind a trail of secrets that would shock the world. The first victim to truly raise suspicion was Robert Piest, a 15-year-old boy. On December 11, 1978, Robert went missing after he left his family to meet Gacy about a potential job opportunity. Gacy had promised Robert's family that he could help the boy with work, but hours later, Robert had vanished. This disappearance led to the first real investigation into Gacy, who initially appeared cooperative, but was increasingly seen as the prime suspect. The police quickly became suspicious of Gacy. Robert's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident. It seemed as though several young men had disappeared in the area over the past few years. Witnesses started to come forward, describing their encounters with Gacy. The police began to dig into Gacy's past, revealing troubling incidents, including a conviction for sexual assault and attempted murder in 1968. This was just the tip of the iceberg. On December 13, 1978, police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's home. They began their search in the two-story house, a seemingly ordinary suburban property. What they found would horrify them. As they moved through the house, they discovered signs of recent killings, including disturbing evidence such as bloodstains and personal items belonging to missing boys. They decided to dig under the house, unaware of the true horrors that awaited them. In the crawl space under Gacy's house, police uncovered the first body. The officers' hearts sank as they unearthed the decomposed remains of a young man. The space, only 30 inches high, was filled with bodies. Gacy had buried his victims one after another, creating a macabre graveyard beneath his own roof. The sight of the mutilated bodies left the officers in shock as they realized the magnitude of Gacy's crimes. John Wayne Gacy was arrested on December 21, 1978. As the police continued to uncover more bodies, they finally had enough evidence to charge him with multiple murders. Gacy was taken into custody without resistance. At first, he denied any involvement, claiming that the bodies found were of strangers who had died by accident or in other circumstances. But the evidence told a different story. As the police interrogated Gacy, he finally confessed to the murders. During a long and intense interview, Gacy admitted to killing at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978. He described how he lured his victims, tied them up, tortured them, and killed them. The details were chilling, as Gacy's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the brutal nature of his crimes. Gacy's method of murder was disturbingly consistent. He would invite his victims to his home, usually under the guise of offering them work or a place to stay. Once inside, he would restrain them using handcuffs, sometimes claiming it was part of a magic trick. He then proceeded to sexually assault and strangle his victims. Many were buried in the crawl space, while others were discarded in nearby rivers. The investigation into Gacy's crimes expanded as more bodies were discovered. By the time Gacy was arrested, investigators had uncovered 29 bodies from his property. As they continued to search the surrounding areas, additional remains were found in rivers. The task force, now fully aware of the scale of the tragedy, worked tirelessly to identify the victims. Forensic experts performed painstaking DNA tests, and missing persons reports were cross-checked. The investigation grew in intensity as authorities realized that Gacy's victims came from various walks of life, and many were young men who had been lured into his home under the guise of work or other false pretenses. The discovery of each new victim only added to the horror, as Gacy's house and surrounding grounds transformed into a macabre crime scene. Identifying the victims was a difficult and painful process. Many of Gacy's victims were young men from troubled backgrounds, often runaways or those with no permanent home. They had been lured by promises of work, and many had been sexually assaulted and killed. It took months for authorities to identify the victims, using dental records and other methods to match the remains to missing persons reports. The identities of the victims brought heartbreak to their families, who had long feared the worst. Investigators dug deeper into Gacy's past to understand how he became the monster he was. Born in 1942, Gacy had a troubled childhood, marked by a volatile relationship with his father, who was abusive and often humiliated him. His early life was filled with incidents of violence and dysfunction. As an adult, Gacy seemed to lead a normal life, but his criminal tendencies surfaced early on, with his conviction for sexual assault in 1968. These early signs of violent behavior set the stage for his future killings. The trial of John Wayne Gacy began in 1980. As Gacy's crimes became widely known, the trial attracted national attention. The prosecution argued that Gacy was a cold and calculating killer, preying on vulnerable young men for his own sadistic pleasures. Gacy's defense team attempted to paint him as insane, suggesting that he was suffering from a multiple personality disorder. However, the evidence presented in court was overwhelming, and Gacy was convicted on all counts. On March 13, 1980, John Wayne Gacy was sentenced to death. The judge handed down the death penalty, citing the gruesome nature of the crimes and the sheer number of victims. Gacy showed little emotion during the sentencing, maintaining the calm demeanor that had been his trademark throughout the investigation. Despite his conviction, Gacy would spend years appealing the verdict, but ultimately he remained on death row for over a decade. While on death row, Gacy's behavior remained peculiar. He spent his days drawing and painting, often creating disturbing images of clowns and figures that reflected his twisted psyche. He also tried to use his notoriety for profit, selling his artwork to the public. Despite the gravity of his crimes, Gacy maintained a sense of pride in his infamous reputation. He often wrote letters to the media, trying to portray himself as a misunderstood man. John Wayne Gacy spent 14 years on death row before his execution. In the years before his execution, Gacy's appeals were denied, and he eventually ran out of legal options. His final days were marked by strange behavior, including requests for a final meal, which he later rejected. On May 10, 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. The aftermath of Gacy's crimes had a profound impact on the community. The revelation of his horrific actions shook the city of Chicago and the entire nation. Parents and children were left in fear, realizing that someone who seemed so trustworthy could commit such monstrous acts. Gacy's case became one of the most infamous serial killer cases in American history, serving as a grim reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a facade of normalcy. Gacy's case was a media sensation, with constant coverage on television and newspapers. Journalists flocked to Gacy's trial, filling the courtrooms and broadcast stations with updates. His chilling photographs and disturbing artworks became part of the public consciousness. Gacy's notoriety, combined with the sheer grotesqueness of his crimes, turned the case into a national obsession. The investigation into Gacy's crimes prompted significant changes in law enforcement protocols. The case highlighted flaws in how missing persons reports were handled and how serial crimes were investigated. Authorities learned valuable lessons from the Gacy case, including the importance of thorough background checks, following up on disappearances, and the need to connect seemingly unrelated crimes. Gacy's case pushed law enforcement to adopt more comprehensive and systematic approaches to identifying serial killers and solving crimes. Gacy's legacy remains a dark chapter in American criminal history. His actions have been studied by criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement to understand the mind of a serial killer. Gacy's chilling persona as the killer clown has become infamous, and he has been the subject of numerous documentaries, books, and films. His crimes serve as a sobering reminder of the horrors that can lurk behind a facade of normalcy and charm. The story of John Wayne Gacy leaves us with many unanswered questions. What drives a man to commit such heinous acts, and why did Gacy feel compelled to kill so many young men? Was it his abusive past, his twisted sense of power, or something darker that led him down this path? As time passes, the world may never fully understand the depths of Gacy's depravity. However, his story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes evil lurks where we least expect it. The story begins in 1974 in Wichita, Kansas, with the brutal murders of the Otero family. Dennis Rader, who would later be known as BTK, killed Joseph and Julie Otero, along with two of their children, 15-year-old Joseph Jr. and 11-year-old Shirley. Rader, with a methodical cruelty, tied them up, tortured them, and left no trace behind. The authorities were left baffled, with no clear motive, and the murders went unsolved. After the Otero murders, Rader vanished from public sight, but the silence didn't last long. In 1978, he resurfaced, sending a chilling letter to a local newspaper. The letter, written with disturbing detail, described how he committed the murders and even mocked the police for their inability to solve the case. It became clear that this was no ordinary killer. He was taunting the authorities, daring them to catch him. The letter contained disturbing details about the murders, including the precise manner in which the victims were tied up and tortured. It also included the now infamous BTK moniker, which stood for bind, torture, kill. Rader's self-proclaimed superiority over the police was evident, and the authorities had no idea who they were dealing with. His twisted need for recognition had only just begun. Rader continued his reign of terror through the late 1970s and 1980s. He killed several more victims, including Shirley Vian in 1979 and Catherine Bright in 1986. The patterns remained eerily similar: bind, torture, kill. Each murder was meticulously planned, and Rader took pleasure in watching his victims suffer. The police were unable to make any significant breakthroughs, and the public was gripped by fear, not knowing when or who would be next. For over a decade, the BTK killings seemed to have faded away. However, in 1991, Rader stopped his killing spree. The case went cold, leaving the police and the public in a state of disbelief. But Rader's need to be acknowledged never ceased. For years, he remained silent. But in 2004, he broke his silence again, sending more letters to the media and police, signaling that he had not been caught and that his reign of terror was not over. In 2004, Rader sent a floppy disk to the media, and this would become the key that would finally unravel his identity. The disk contained files with metadata that pointed directly to a church where Rader worked. This digital clue, combined with other evidence, would lead investigators to connect the dots and ultimately identify Dennis Rader as the notorious BTK killer. In February 2005, after years of evading the authorities, Dennis Rader was finally arrested. The arrest took place without resistance, and Rader was taken into custody. He did not seem surprised or emotional. Instead, he was calm, almost detached, as though he had anticipated this moment. He was charged with the murders of 10 victims, and his dark secret was revealed to the world. During interrogation, Rader confessed to all 10 murders, providing chilling details about how he had stalked his victims, tortured them, and then killed them. He admitted to the thrill he experienced in controlling the lives of others. His confession was disturbingly calm and detached, as though he was recounting a routine event, not the brutal killings he had committed. In 2005, Dennis Rader went to trial, facing charges for the murders of his 10 victims. The courtroom was filled with tension as victims' families spoke about the loss and pain caused by Rader's actions. Rader, representing himself, showed no remorse and even made statements about the satisfaction he gained from his murders. The trial was a chilling reminder of the depths of his cruelty. Throughout the trial, Rader's disturbing lack of empathy became painfully clear. He showed no remorse for his actions, speaking coldly about his victims and their suffering. Psychiatric evaluations later confirmed that Rader had a long history of sadistic tendencies, and his cold demeanor was a hallmark of his psychopathy. This lack of emotion only made his crimes seem even more terrifying, as he appeared to be completely detached from the horror he caused. Rader's ability to blend into society for so many years was part of what made him so dangerous. He was a church leader, a husband, and a father, maintaining an outwardly normal life while secretly being one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history. His ability to compartmentalize his dark urges and everyday persona made him nearly invisible. This chilling duality is what made Rader a particularly terrifying figure. Even after his arrest, Rader's need for attention and control didn't end. He continued to send letters to the media and the authorities, taunting them with cryptic messages. These letters, sometimes containing disturbing drawings or details of his crimes, were his way of reminding everyone that he was still in control of the narrative, even from behind bars. His obsession with being recognized never waned. Dennis Rader's reign of terror left a long-lasting impact on Wichita and beyond. The community lived in constant fear, never knowing when the next victim might fall. Even after his arrest, the psychological scars remained. The media coverage of his case highlighted the dangers of complacency and the chilling reality that anyone, even the most seemingly ordinary people, could harbor a monstrous secret. BTK's legacy is one of fear and the unsettling truth that evil can lurk in the most unsuspecting places. In August 2005, Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison for the murders he had committed. He showed no emotion during the sentencing, maintaining his detached demeanor. While his reign of terror had ended, the scars of his crimes would never truly fade. The families of his victims could finally begin to heal, knowing that their loved ones had not been forgotten. However, Rader's legacy as one of the most calculating and chilling serial killers in history remained. Dennis Rader's case serves as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lie hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. His ability to live among his victims while committing such horrific acts speaks to the complexity of evil. As society continues to grapple with the legacy of BTK, it is clear that the chilling tale of Dennis Rader will never be forgotten, and his crimes will forever echo in the minds of those who lived through them. Shadow Mysteries, unraveling the horrifying mysteries of crime cases. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch the next thrilling and suspenseful episodes. Alcatraz Island, a foreboding piece of land standing stark in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, was once home to some of America's most dangerous criminals. With its towering concrete walls, sharp barbed wire, and isolation from the mainland, it was believed to be the most inescapable prison in the world. But in June 1962, a daring escape would prove that even Alcatraz's iron grip could be loosened. Three men, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, would go down in history for pulling off one of the most baffling prison escapes ever attempted. Frank Morris, a career criminal with a sharp mind, was known for his ability to escape from institutions. He was sent to Alcatraz in 1960 after a series of bank robberies and prison escapes. Alongside him were the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, both seasoned criminals who had spent most of their lives in and out of prison. John Anglin was notorious for escaping from various jails, and Clarence had a similar track record. The three men, despite the seemingly insurmountable odds, shared a common goal: freedom. For months, the three men quietly observed their surroundings. Frank Morris, with his keen intellect, noticed the weaknesses in the prison's design. The prison cells, while fortified, had ventilation shafts and structural gaps that could be exploited. They spent days collecting small items, a spoon here, a piece of wire there, things they could use to carve and shape their escape. It was a slow and careful process, and the guards were none the wiser. They planned every detail of their daring escape, aware that the smallest mistake could lead to disaster. The method the men used was ingenious. They began by chiseling small holes in the walls of their cells using spoons, which they had modified into crude tools. Over time, the holes grew large enough to allow them to crawl through. Behind their cells, a dark, narrow passage led to the roof, where they would make their final move. This tunnel, hidden from the guards' view, was their lifeline to freedom. They worked quietly at night, their labor hidden by the noise of the prison's usual operations. The decoy heads were a stroke of brilliance, a masterful touch in the plan. Each man fashioned a lifelike head from plaster, toilet paper, and real human hair they had secretly gathered. These heads were placed in their beds at night, making it appear as though the prisoners were asleep and unaware of their surroundings. The guards, in their routine checks, never suspected a thing. The heads were so realistic that even up close, they fooled the most vigilant eyes. It was a perfect deception, and it bought them precious hours of freedom. On the night of June 11th, 1962, the plan was finally put into action. The guards had conducted their usual checks, and everything appeared normal. The three men, armed with their carefully crafted tools and the decoy heads in place, began their escape. They crawled through the holes they had created and carefully made their way to the roof. The night was dark, the air damp with the salt of the sea as they took their first steps towards freedom. Every noise, every movement was calculated. The tension was palpable. Once on the roof, they faced another daunting challenge: descending the outer wall of the prison. Using a crude rope made from raincoats, they made their way down the steep, slippery surface. One wrong move, and they could have fallen to their deaths. But they were determined, their every action precise, as they navigated the dangerous climb down. From the top of the prison, they could see the cold waters of San Francisco Bay stretching out before them. The hardest part was still ahead. The men had planned for their escape to end at the shores of San Francisco Bay, but the waters were cold and treacherous. They had managed to build a small makeshift raft from raincoats, which they hoped would carry them to safety. The current was strong, and the night was their only ally. As they paddled through the icy waters, the prison lights faded into the distance. The escapees were free, at least for now, but they knew the hardest part was yet to come: avoiding capture. The next morning, when the prison realized that the 3 men were missing, a full-scale search was launched. The authorities combed the surrounding waters, using boats and helicopters, searching for any sign of the escapees. But the men had vanished without a trace. The cold waters of the bay seemed to have swallowed them whole. The prison, once considered escape-proof, now stood as the scene of one of the most daring and mysterious breakouts in American history. As the search efforts continued, authorities became desperate. They interviewed fellow prisoners, guards, and anyone who might have had any knowledge of the escape plan. Many believed the escapees had drowned in the bay, and this theory gained traction after several weeks passed without a lead. Despite all the resources being poured into the investigation, no tangible evidence of their whereabouts ever surfaced. The men, it seemed, had simply disappeared into thin air. The prison, once thought to be escape-proof, had failed to keep its most cunning criminals in check. Some experts believed that the escapees did survive and managed to reach the mainland. They speculated that the men used their knowledge of the currents in the bay to navigate their way to safety. Others thought they might have found refuge in the dense forests around San Francisco, or even made their way to Mexico. But no concrete evidence ever emerged to confirm any of these theories. The mystery of what happened to Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin continued to haunt the authorities for years. The families of the Anglin brothers were also questioned during the investigation. Although they were initially cooperative, suspicion grew as time passed. Many believed that the Anglin family had assisted the escapees in some way. The Anglin family, however, always denied any involvement in the breakout. There were rumors that they had sent money to the brothers after their escape, but no proof was ever found. The family remained tight-lipped, keeping their secrets close to the chest. In 1963, a wallet was found floating in the waters near Alcatraz Island. It was believed to have belonged to one of the escapees, and it became a key piece of evidence in the case. Some believed that it was dropped in haste, perhaps by one of the escapees trying to evade capture. However, others speculated that the wallet had been planted as part of a larger plot to throw off investigators. The wallet provided no concrete clues about the men's fate, but it added another layer to the already complex mystery. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the search for the escapees never truly stopped. In the years following the escape, the FBI continued to receive tips and reports of sightings. Most of these turned out to be false alarms, but some were more convincing than others. One report suggested the Anglin brothers were living in a rural area in Florida. Another claimed to have seen Frank Morris in a small town in Mexico. Yet none of these reports were ever confirmed, and the case remained unsolved. In 1963, just a year after the escape, Alcatraz was officially closed as a prison. Many speculated that the escape played a role in the decision, but the official reason given was financial. Maintaining the prison had become too costly, and it was no longer deemed necessary. Some saw the closure as a symbolic end to the era of the escape-proof prison. Ironically, the escape had shown that even the most secure facility could be breached, albeit in a way that would never fully be understood. In 1979, the FBI officially closed the case on the Alcatraz escape, concluding that the men had likely drowned while trying to escape. However, they left the case open in case new evidence surfaced. Despite the years of investigation, the truth about the fate of the 3 men remained elusive. Some believed they had made it to freedom, while others insisted they had met a grim end in the bay. The lack of closure only added to the enduring allure of the mystery. Decades have passed since the escape, and yet the mystery endures. In the years following the incident, several documentaries and books have been published about the escape. Many still wonder whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers made it out alive, or if they perished in the icy waters of San Francisco Bay. The Alcatraz escape continues to capture the imagination of people around the world, and every year new theories emerge about what really happened. In recent years, new evidence has come to light that has reignited the debate over the fate of the escapees. A 2018 documentary revealed a series of photographs of a family in Brazil, believed to be the Anglin brothers, living in hiding. The images stirred up new excitement, but the truth remains unclear. Was this a breakthrough or just another wild theory? The case has once again captured public attention, but answers continue to elude investigators. No matter what theories come and go, there are still many unanswered questions about the Alcatraz escape. Did the men drown, or did they somehow manage to escape and live their lives in hiding? What role did the prison staff play in the escape? Was there any inside help, or did they truly plan and execute the escape on their own? These questions may never be answered, but the allure of this unsolved mystery remains as strong as ever. The story of the Alcatraz escape has become a legend. It is a tale of daring, courage, and a thirst for freedom that has captivated the public for decades. Whether or not Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers ever reached safety, their escape will always be remembered as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. The allure of the unknown continues to haunt Alcatraz Island, and the escape will live on in the minds of people for generations to come. On February 4th, 1974, Patty Hearst, heir to the Hearst media empire, was kidnapped from her apartment in San Francisco by members of the Radical Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA. Patty was just 19 years old when the SLA stormed into her home, tied her up, and drove her away in a car. The group's leader, Donald DeFreeze, and other members demanded that Patty's wealthy family distribute $70 million worth of food to poor Californians. The audacity of the kidnapping sent shockwaves across the nation, and the case immediately became a media spectacle. The SLA's demands were not just about money. They wanted a complete overhaul of the social system, one where the oppressed would rise up against their wealthy oppressors. The SLA made it clear that if their demands weren't met, they would harm Patty. To show their seriousness, they even released a chilling audio recording of Patty pleading for her family to meet the group's demands, accompanied by threats. The radical group had a clear message. Society's existing order had to be destroyed, and they were willing to do whatever it took to achieve that. A few weeks after the kidnapping, Patty appeared in a videotaped message. She was now calling herself Tanya, a name assigned by the SLA. In the video, Patty, holding a rifle, declared her full support for the group and their mission. She insisted that her family's wealth was built on the oppression of the poor, and she had come to believe in the SLA's revolutionary cause. Her conversion shocked the public, who initially believed she was a helpless victim. But Patty's dramatic shift from victim to active participant raised questions. Was she coerced, or had she truly embraced the cause of the SLA? On April 15, 1974, Patty participated in one of the most shocking events of her life, a bank robbery in San Francisco. In footage from the robbery, Patty can be seen armed with a rifle, wearing a bandolier, and helping the SLA members steal money from the bank. Her presence in the robbery left no doubt that she was fully integrated into the group, and the sight of her in action was unsettling for many. The video footage showed Patty interacting with her fellow SLA members as though she was one of them, not a victim at all. As the case unfolded, the media frenzy surrounding Patty's transformation was unlike anything the country had ever seen. The young woman, once a privileged heir to a media empire, was now a wanted criminal. News outlets across the nation broadcasted her involvement in the robbery, and debates raged over whether Patty had been brainwashed or whether she had voluntarily joined the SLA's cause. Some sympathized with her as a victim of manipulation, while others viewed her as a dangerous criminal. The media circus reached a fever pitch as people across the country tried to make sense of her actions. Patty's participation in the SLA didn't stop with the bank robbery. In May of 1974, she was involved in another heist, further cementing her role within the group. This time, the SLA raided a grocery store, again with Patty in tow. She appeared unfazed, actively participating in the theft. By now, it was clear that Patty was not just a passive participant, but an integral part of the SLA's operations. Whether by choice or by force, Patty's involvement in these crimes continued to grow. As Patty's involvement in criminal activities deepened, the FBI launched a nationwide manhunt for her. The Bureau utilized all available resources to track down the fugitive. But despite numerous leads, Patty and the SLA managed to evade capture. Patty's increasing role in the group's actions left many questioning how far she was willing to go. Was she a pawn in a radical game, or had she embraced the revolution fully? The FBI's investigation was fueled by these uncertainties, making the hunt all the more urgent. On September 18, 1975, after over a year of hiding, Patty was finally captured by the FBI in a San Francisco apartment. The arrest was a momentous occasion that captured the attention of the nation. Cameras flashed as agents took Patty into custody, and the media swarmed around, eager to capture every detail of the dramatic event. Her capture sparked intense debates, with some seeing her as a victim, while others saw her as a criminal who had chosen to embrace violence. The nation was torn over how to view Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst's trial began in 1976, and it immediately attracted intense media attention. The defense team argued that she had been brainwashed and coerced into participating in the SLA's crimes. Her lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, painted a picture of a young woman who had been psychologically manipulated by the radical group, stripping her of her agency and forcing her into criminal activities. On the other hand, the prosecution argued that Patty was not a victim, but a willing accomplice who fully embraced the SLA's ideology. The trial became a battle of narratives, with each side attempting to define Patty's role in the crimes. During the trial, Patty was given the chance to testify. In her emotional testimony, she detailed how she had been held captive, beaten, and psychologically manipulated by the SLA. She spoke about her fear for her life and how, over time, the radical group's ideologies were drilled into her until she started to believe in their cause. Patty's testimony was heartbreaking and incredibly compelling, with many in the courtroom sympathizing with her. However, there were also skeptics who questioned her sincerity. Had she truly been brainwashed, or was she simply making excuses for her actions? Public opinion was deeply divided during the trial. Some saw Patty as a victim of the radical group, while others viewed her as a dangerous criminal who willingly participated in violent acts. The media often took sides, with some outlets portraying her as a naive young woman who was taken advantage of, while others depicted her as a ruthless, ideological criminal. The debate over whether Patty was a victim or a perpetrator became one of the defining elements of the case, and it reflected the larger societal divide over issues like radicalism and the role of women in revolutionary movements. After several months of testimony, the jury deliberated for just over a week before returning a guilty verdict on counts of armed robbery and bank robbery. Patty Hearst was sentenced to 35 years in prison, though her defense team continued to argue that she was a victim of coercion. The verdict shocked many, as they had hoped for leniency based on Patty's apparent transformation under duress. Her conviction sparked nationwide debates about the fairness of her trial, and many people questioned whether she had received a fair chance to defend herself. In 1979, after serving just over 2 years of her sentence, Patty Hearst's case became the subject of national controversy once again. President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence, reducing her time in prison significantly. Many felt that this was a politically motivated decision, as the Hearst family had significant influence and connections. Others viewed it as an act of compassion for a young woman who had suffered deeply during her kidnapping and subsequent ordeal. The commutation sparked debates about justice, privilege, and whether Patty truly deserved to be released early. In 2001, a surprising twist occurred when President Bill Clinton granted Patty Hearst a full pardon. This decision stirred even more controversy, with critics arguing that she had gotten away with serious crimes due to her family's wealth and influence. Supporters, however, viewed Clinton's pardon as an acknowledgement of the years Patty had already spent in prison and the psychological toll her ordeal had taken on her. The political context surrounding the pardon, including Clinton's ties to the Hearst family, added another layer of complexity to an already controversial case. Patty Hearst's release from prison did little to settle the debate over her actions. Public perception of her remained deeply divided. Some still viewed her as a victim who had been manipulated by a dangerous group, while others regarded her as a criminal who had used her family's wealth and power to avoid a full sentence. Her life after prison, including her marriage to her bodyguard and later her work as an advocate for victims of domestic violence, did little to change the entrenched opinions about her involvement with the SLA. After her release from prison, Patty Hearst tried to rebuild her life, but her past continued to haunt her. Despite her efforts to lead a private life, she was often in the spotlight, and many journalists sought to interview her, eager to understand how she had changed. Patty made several public appearances, including joining the board of directors of a major telecommunications company, but her public image was forever tied to her involvement in the SLA and the violent actions she had taken part in. The psychological toll that her time with the SLA took on Patty Hearst was profound. Many experts believe that Patty's participation in the SLA's violent actions was the result of a complex mix of fear, manipulation, and Stockholm Syndrome. The trauma of being kidnapped, held captive, and exposed to violent ideology took its toll on her mental health, leading her to make decisions that she later regretted. The debate over whether Patty had genuinely embraced the group's philosophy or had been a victim of psychological abuse continues to fuel interest in her case. Even decades after the trial, the Patty Hearst case continues to captivate the public imagination. The questions surrounding her motivations, her relationship with the SLA, and her eventual pardon remain topics of intense debate. Was she a victim, a willing participant, or a revolutionary in her own right? The case has inspired countless books, documentaries, and films, each attempting to uncover the truth behind one of the most controversial and mysterious episodes in American criminal history. Patty Hearst's case had a lasting impact on American culture, influencing how society views kidnapping, radicalism, and the media's role in shaping public opinion. Her story raised questions about the psychology of coercion, the boundaries between victimhood and complicity, and the power of the media in sensationalizing events. It also prompted discussions about the treatment of women in radical movements and whether they were viewed as victims or active participants. In many ways, Patty Hearst's story is an exploration of the complexities of human behavior under extreme pressure. The Patty Hearst case remains one of the most discussed and debated criminal cases in American history. Its unresolved questions about Patty's motivations and the true nature of her involvement with the SLA continue to fascinate people around the world. Whether she was a victim of manipulation, a criminal, or a revolutionary, Patty Hearst's story is one that transcends the boundaries of time, leaving a legacy that still stirs conversation, analysis, and reflection to this day. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. From a young age, he exhibited signs of deep psychological distress. Dahmer's parents, Lionel and Joyce, had a turbulent marriage, and his father often left home for work, leaving Jeffrey and his younger brother to grow up in a strained environment. As a child, Dahmer became obsessed with dead animals, a precursor to his later violent tendencies. His fascination with dissection grew, and he would collect roadkill, dissecting them in the woods behind his house. This early behavior was a chilling indicator of the dark path he would take in life. As Dahmer grew older, his behavior became increasingly erratic. In high school, he was often seen as a loner, socially awkward, and disconnected from his peers. Despite his troubled social life, Dahmer's parents had high hopes for him, but he struggled academically and socially. His fascination with death intensified. He began to drink heavily, starting at the age of 14, and his alcoholism only worsened in his teenage years. It was clear that Dahmer's early life was full of emotional neglect and confusion, setting the stage for his later actions. On June 18, 1978, at the age of 18, Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder. He lured Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker, into his car with the promise of drinking together. Once they arrived at Dahmer's home, Dahmer struck Hicks with a dumbbell, killing him. He then sexually assaulted the body and dismembered it, keeping the parts as trophies. Dahmer would later describe this act as one that gave him a sense of power and control, a feeling he would seek repeatedly in his future crimes. Following Stephen Hicks's murder, Dahmer's killing spree escalated. He murdered several more men in the years that followed, each time using similar methods. Dahmer would lure his victims, usually young men, to his apartment with promises of alcohol, drugs, or money. Once there, he would drug them, strangle them, and then performed grotesque acts on their bodies. He kept body parts, including skulls and genitals, as trophies, preserving them in his apartment. His murders followed a chilling pattern, with Dahmer growing more confident and less remorseful with each killing. In 1991, Dahmer's killing spree was finally brought to an end, but not by his own volition. On July 22, 1991, one of Dahmer's intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape from his apartment and flagged down 2 police officers. Edwards led the officers back to the apartment, where they discovered gruesome evidence of Dahmer's crimes. They found photographs of dismembered bodies, body parts, and other disturbing items. Dahmer was arrested on the spot and later confessed to his horrific crimes. In a chilling confession, Dahmer revealed the details of his murders. He spoke about the thrill he got from the act of killing and the psychological compulsion that drove him to do it. Dahmer described how he carefully planned each murder, often spending hours in advance preparing his apartment. He explained that his motivation was rooted in a need for control and power over his victims, which was further fueled by his compulsive desires. His cold, calm demeanor during his confession horrified both investigators and the public. Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest on July 22, 1991, sent shockwaves throughout the nation. News of the capture spread quickly, and the grisly details of his crimes became headline news. For the public, Dahmer's arrest marked the end of a long-standing nightmare. The images of the dismembered bodies and his bizarre, cold demeanor left the country reeling. Many couldn't believe that someone who seemed so ordinary and unremarkable on the outside could be capable of such horrific acts. His arrest led to more questions than answers, as authorities began to piece together the full scale of his murders. As the investigation into Dahmer's crimes unfolded, more disturbing details emerged. The authorities discovered that Dahmer had been hiding body parts, including heads, arms, and genitals, in his apartment. He kept them in jars, carefully preserving them as if they were trophies. Further investigation revealed the extent of his depravity. Dahmer had also engaged in acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. The discovery of these horrific details shocked even seasoned investigators who had never encountered such a case before. The victims of Jeffrey Dahmer were primarily young men, many of whom were of color. Dahmer's strategy was to prey on vulnerable individuals, men who were often homeless or struggling with addiction. He lured them to his apartment with promises of money, alcohol, or drugs. Dahmer's victims included men from all walks of life, each one unsuspecting of the horrific fate that awaited them. The disparity in his victims' backgrounds highlighted Dahmer's opportunistic and predatory nature. Dahmer's confession grew more chilling with each passing day. One of the most shocking revelations was his admission of cannibalism. He confessed that he had eaten parts of some of his victims, further highlighting his complete lack of empathy or remorse. Dahmer explained that his need for control and power extended to his desire to consume his victims' flesh, which he described as an act of ultimate possession. The cannibalism aspect of his crimes added another layer of horror to the already grotesque nature of his killings. In 1992, Dahmer went to trial, and the proceedings were broadcast nationwide. The trial became a spectacle as the nation tuned in to witness the fate of one of the most notorious serial killers in history. Dahmer's defense team argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, citing his troubled childhood and mental health issues. The prosecution, however, argued that Dahmer knew exactly what he was doing, and they sought the death penalty. In the end, Dahmer was found guilty of 15 murders and sentenced to life in prison. Dahmer's life in prison was as disturbing as his life outside. He was initially placed in solitary confinement due to the high level of threat he posed to other inmates. Dahmer reportedly spent his time reading religious texts and drawing. He claimed that he had found God and had turned away from his violent past. However, many of the other inmates found it hard to accept him, seeing him as a monster. In 1994, Dahmer was killed by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, while cleaning a bathroom at the Columbia Correctional Institution. The aftermath of Dahmer's arrest and conviction had a profound impact on the public. Many were horrified by the details of his crimes and the fact that he had been able to carry out his murders for so many years without getting caught. Victims' families spoke out, expressing their grief and anger. Dahmer became a symbol of evil, his name synonymous with one of the most horrifying serial killer cases in American history. The case sparked widespread discussions about the psychology of serial killers and the failures of the criminal justice system. Despite the horror surrounding his crimes, Jeffrey Dahmer's story became a focal point of pop culture. Books, documentaries, and movies were made about him, with some even portraying his life in a sensationalized manner. His case has been used as a cautionary tale, showing the danger of not addressing mental health issues and the flaws in the criminal justice system. While many find it disturbing, Dahmer's notoriety continues to captivate the public's imagination, making him one of the most infamous figures in American criminal history. Dahmer's case also led to reforms within law enforcement and corrections. Following his crimes, authorities reassessed the way they handled missing persons cases, especially involving marginalized communities. Dahmer's ability to evade capture for so long made it clear that changes needed to be made in both police procedures and how they dealt with at-risk populations. Additionally, his case sparked discussions on the treatment of prisoners in the justice system and the responsibilities of correctional facilities to protect individuals, even those convicted of heinous crimes. Jeffrey Dahmer's life came to a tragic and violent end in November 1994, when he was killed by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Dahmer's death ended the nightmare he had inflicted on his victims and their families, but his legacy lives on in the infamy he achieved. While many saw his death as a form of justice, others believed that Dahmer deserved to face his punishment in a court of law. Nevertheless, his end marked the conclusion of one of the most disturbing chapters in American criminal history. The crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer serve as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within seemingly ordinary individuals. His life and crimes continue to be a subject of fascination, reflection, and horror. The questions surrounding his motivations and the reasons behind his monstrous acts remain unanswered, but his legacy has shaped the way society views serial killers and their ability to evade capture. Dahmer's story is one that will forever be remembered as one of the most horrifying and unsettling chapters in criminal history. Los Angeles, June 1984. As the sun sets over the city, a sense of unease begins to permeate the air. Jenny Vinso, a 79-year-old woman, is at home alone in Glassell Park. She had just locked her doors and settled in for the night, unaware of the horror that awaited her. Hours later, neighbors would find her brutally murdered, her body displaying signs of intense violence and trauma. The police initially treat it as an isolated incident, but little do they know, this is just the start of a horrifying wave of terror. By early 1985, police begin to notice a chilling pattern. Maria Hernandez, a young woman, is attacked outside her home in Rosemead, California. She survives the assault miraculously, but her roommate, Dale Okazaki, is not as fortunate and is killed inside. The killer enters and exits silently, leaving behind no fingerprints, only a sense of dread and a signature mark, an Avia sneaker print. Law enforcement realizes that they may be dealing with a serial offender, a predator who strikes without warning. As spring settles over Los Angeles, the attacks continue with even more brutality. Bill Doi and his wife Lillian are at home in Monterey Park when they are suddenly awoken by a stranger. Ramirez, with cold and calculated precision, restrains Bill and assaults Lillian. By the time police arrive, Bill has succumbed to his injuries, while Lillian survives with deep trauma. The couple's home becomes yet another crime scene with the same eerie Avia sneaker print, confirming detectives' fears that this killer is both relentless and merciless. The summer heat intensifies, mirroring the boiling fear in the community. On July 2, 1985, Ramirez enters the home of Patty Elaine Higgins in Arcadia. The 28-year-old woman is found dead in her bed the next morning, her face bearing the marks of a vicious attack. This time, Ramirez leaves behind a pentagram on the wall, written in blood, an unmistakable sign of his disturbing fascination with satanic rituals. Media coverage surges, and residents of Los Angeles begin double-locking their doors and windows, living in fear of the Night Stalker. One of Ramirez's most brutal attacks occurs on August 6, 1985, in Northridge. Chris and Virginia Peterson, a young couple, are at home when Ramirez breaks in and immediately opens fire. Against all odds, both Chris and Virginia survive, with Chris even managing to chase Ramirez out of their home. This close encounter is a shocking deviation from the typical outcome, and it galvanizes the community with hope that this killer may finally be vulnerable. Ramirez strikes again on August 24th, attacking Bill Carnes and his fiancée Inez Erickson in Mission Viejo. After a horrifying assault, Inez miraculously survives and provides police with a detailed description of her attacker. This crucial break, combined with forensic evidence including the infamous Avius sneaker print, finally gives detectives a clear target. The police release a sketch, and the image of the Night Stalker is broadcast across California. With the suspect's face now known, panic turns into resolve as citizens across Los Angeles arm themselves, staying vigilant and keeping an eye out for the killer. Posters with Ramirez's image are plastered on walls and billboards. Neighborhood watch groups form, and the city stands united in its determination to stop this menace. The tide has turned, and the Night Stalker is no longer an invisible threat, but a wanted man. On August 31st, Ramirez's face is recognized by a group of citizens in East Los Angeles. He tries to flee, but an angry mob forms, determined to capture him. Police arrive just in time to arrest Ramirez and take him into custody, ending months of terror. As news spreads of the Night Stalker's capture, Los Angeles collectively breathes a sigh of relief, grateful that their long nightmare has finally come to an end. In October 1985, Richard Ramirez stands before a packed courtroom for his first appearance. Dressed in a dark suit, his gaunt face and wild eyes send a chill through the spectators. The charges against him are read aloud. 14 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and dozens of robberies. Ramirez's unsettling demeanor, including a chilling grin directed at the victims' families, becomes his signature. The public begins to see him not only as a killer, but as a man with a sinister sense of pride. During his trial, Ramirez's fascination with Satanism becomes a focal point. In the courtroom, he is often seen making the horns gesture with his hands, a sign of his belief in the devil. He openly admits to being influenced by satanic ideology, claiming that he was simply following orders from a higher power. The public is horrified by his unapologetic attitude and the blatant display of his dark beliefs. These actions add a terrifying layer to his already monstrous reputation. As the trial continues, survivors and family members of the victims are called to the stand to give their testimonies. One by one, they recount the horrors they endured at the hands of Ramirez. The strength and resilience of these survivors, some of whom had been raped and tortured, deeply moves the court. Their words fill the room with a sense of justice as they express their desire for Ramirez to be held accountable for the suffering he caused. By 1987, Ramirez's defense team continues to argue that he should not be held fully accountable due to his troubled upbringing and mental state. They present evidence of a traumatic childhood, claiming that Ramirez's violent tendencies were a result of years of abuse. However, the prosecution paints a different picture, emphasizing that Ramirez's actions were premeditated and driven by pure malice. The legal battle intensifies and both sides prepare for a lengthy and public trial. In September 1989, after years of trials, the jury finally returns with a guilty verdict. Ramirez is convicted on all charges, including 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and countless robberies. The courtroom erupts in applause as the victims' families express their relief, knowing that justice has finally been served. Ramirez, however, remains stoic, showing no emotion as the sentence is read aloud. In the aftermath of the conviction, the court imposes the death penalty on Richard Ramirez. He is sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he is placed on death row. The decision is met with mixed reactions from the public. Some rejoice, while others question the ethics of the death penalty. Ramirez, ever defiant, continues to express his belief in Satan and claims that he is at peace with his fate. His unwavering attitude makes him an even more chilling figure in the eyes of many. Throughout the 1990s, Ramirez lives a life of solitude and routine on death row. His days are spent in a small cell, and he is allowed limited contact with the outside world. Occasionally, he receives fan mail from people who are fascinated by his crimes and his satanic beliefs. Some of these letters are from women who claim to be in love with him, adding an eerie layer to his infamy. Despite his confinement, Ramirez's name continues to haunt the public's imagination. January 1974, Washington State. A string of disappearances has begun, leaving the police baffled. The victims are young, attractive women, all of them last seen walking alone at night near university campuses. The pattern is eerily similar, but the authorities cannot yet make a connection. There's no suspect, no witnesses, just an unsettling feeling in the air. Among the missing is a young woman named Linda Mae Healy. Her disappearance will soon be connected to the dark figure who will become one of America's most infamous serial killers, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy is a 27-year-old law student with a charm that lures people in. With his handsome appearance and smooth talking, he's the kind of man people trust instantly. Little do they know that behind his well-groomed facade lies a killer. Bundy starts targeting young women at night, often luring them with his disarming charm, pretending to be injured or in need of help. He strikes under the cover of darkness, quickly abducting his victims, leaving the authorities in the dark about the identity of the predator. In the early hours of January 1974, Bundy abducts his first victim, 18-year-old Linda Ann Healy, a university student in Seattle. She was last seen while leaving her apartment on the evening of January 31st. Her body was never found, but Bundy's signature brutality becomes apparent in the later investigations. He had a methodical approach to his murders, ensuring his victims were alone and vulnerable. With each attack, Bundy learns more about his victims, their fear, and how to make them disappear without a trace. By the summer of 1974, Bundy's killing spree has spread to Utah. There, he abducts and kills more women, each time with more violence and precision. One of his most infamous crimes is the murder of 18-year-old Nancy Wilcox. The authorities begin to notice a troubling pattern, but Bundy remains elusive, always one step ahead. He continues to deceive, manipulate, and murder, growing more brazen with each attack. On August 16, 1975, Bundy's luck finally runs out. He's pulled over by a police officer in Utah for a routine traffic stop. In the car, the officer finds burglary tools and other suspicious items linked to his abductions. Bundy is arrested, and it marks the beginning of the end for his killing spree. Although he denies the charges, the evidence starts to mount against him. Ted Bundy's first trial begins in 1975, where he faces charges related to the kidnapping and assault of Carol Duranch, a woman he had abducted and managed to escape from. The trial becomes a spectacle, with Bundy representing himself in court. His charisma and smooth-talking charm both the jury and the public. Despite his defense, the evidence against him is overwhelming, and Bundy is found guilty of kidnapping and assault. However, he is still not linked to the murders at this point. In 1978, Bundy's killing spree takes him to Florida, where he commits some of his most brutal murders. At Florida State University, he attacks several young women in their dormitories, leaving behind a trail of horror. The brutality of these crimes shocks the public. Bundy's appearance begins to change, his hair longer and more unkempt, but his murderous drive is stronger than ever. He is now a wanted fugitive, and the search for him intensifies. On February 15, 1978, Bundy is finally apprehended by the police in Florida. He is caught after a high-speed chase through the streets of the city. Bundy is arrested and taken into custody. This marks the end of his reign of terror, but the nightmare for his victims' families is far from over. Bundy's arrest is just the beginning of a long legal battle. He remains calm, even confident, as he faces the charges against him. Bundy's trial begins in 1979. The court is packed with spectators, journalists, and survivors who finally get the chance to confront the man who terrorized their lives. Bundy chooses to represent himself, further adding to the spectacle of the trial. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Witnesses, DNA, and forensic evidence link him to the murders. But Bundy remains calm, occasionally making a joke or offering an explanation for his actions. The trial becomes a media circus, drawing attention from all over the world. As the trial progresses, the gory details of Bundy's crimes come to light. The victims, many of them college students, had been brutally beaten, raped, and murdered. Bundy's pattern becomes clearer with each testimony. He often stalked his victims for days before striking, and the brutality of the murders grows more evident as the cases unfold. The public is horrified as the scope of Bundy's cruelty becomes clear, and his charming demeanor begins to crack under the pressure. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberates. Bundy's fate is sealed as they return with a guilty verdict for the murder of 2 women in Florida. Bundy is sentenced to death by electrocution. As the verdict is read, Bundy remains composed, though there's a flicker of emotion in his eyes. He continues to maintain his innocence, claiming that he was framed, but the evidence is irrefutable. The families of his victims finally feel a sense of justice as Bundy's fate is sealed. In 1977, Bundy is granted an unexpected opportunity when he is transferred to a courthouse in Aspen, Colorado. He manages to escape custody by jumping out of a window and into the woods, disappearing for several weeks. His escape reignites fears that Bundy is still capable of evading capture. The public is in a state of panic as Bundy is once again free to strike. His escape highlights the terrifying reality that Bundy is not only a murderer, but a master manipulator who knows how to escape even the most secure facilities. In his final months on death row, Bundy begins to confess to the murders of dozens of women across several states. He provides chilling details of his crimes, explaining his motives in a detached, almost casual manner. He admits to enjoying the power he felt over his victims. His confessions only add to the horror of his crimes, and many families finally get the answers they've been searching for. Bundy's confessions are a chilling reminder of the depths of his depravity. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy's life ends at Florida State Prison. In the hours leading up to his execution, Bundy is calm, though somewhat reflective. He shows little remorse for the lives he took, but offers apologies to the families of his victims in a final, cold statement. His execution by electric chair marks the end of one of America's most horrific murder sprees. For the families of his victims, the end of Bundy's life is bittersweet, but it brings closure to a chapter of terror that lasted far too long. After Ted Bundy's execution in 1989, his crimes continued to haunt the nation. The brutal nature of his killings, combined with his charm and intelligence, left an indelible mark on public perception of serial killers. Bundy's ability to blend into society, his manipulative tactics, and the way he evaded capture for so long led to greater awareness about the psychological profiles of serial killers. His case influenced how law enforcement would investigate future serial murders, leading to advancements in criminal profiling, forensic evidence collection, and the use of public databases to track offenders. March 1, 1932, Hopewell, New Jersey. At approximately 9 p.m., Charles Lindbergh Jr., the 20-month-old son of famed aviator Charles Lindbergh and his wife Anne Morrow Lindbergh, was kidnapped from his crib at the family's estate in Hopewell, New Jersey. The child's disappearance sent shockwaves throughout the nation, with the Lindberghs immediately alerting the authorities. The only clue left behind was a ransom note demanding $50,000 for the child's safe return. The nation watched as the search for the baby began, drawing attention from the public and the press alike. The investigation into the kidnapping began immediately. The police launched an extensive search, enlisting the help of local authorities, the FBI, and even the military. The ransom note, written in broken English, was analyzed for clues. Investigators quickly determined that the kidnapper had likely planned the crime with careful precision. A massive reward was offered for any information leading to the capture of the child or the kidnapper. The first ransom note left by the kidnappers was discovered by Lindbergh's staff. It was written on a scrap of paper, demanding $50,000 for the child's release, and the note instructed the Lindberghs to follow specific steps for the money exchange. The note's broken English and strange phrasing raised suspicions that the kidnapper may not be a native English speaker. The Lindberghs complied with the instructions, hoping to receive further instructions on where to deliver the ransom. On the night of March 3rd, a ladder was discovered near the Lindbergh estate. It appeared to be the same ladder used by the kidnappers to enter the nursery and take the child. Upon inspection, it was found to have been hastily constructed, leading investigators to believe it was built specifically for the crime. This discovery provided a critical lead in the investigation and helped further confirm that the kidnapping was a premeditated act. In the aftermath of the kidnapping, the ransom notes were subjected to extensive handwriting analysis. Experts determined that the notes were written by the same person, and they identified distinct writing patterns. This provided a critical lead, but the analysis did not yet point directly to a suspect. The handwriting comparison would later become a key piece of evidence in the trial of Bruno Hauptmann. 2 years after the kidnapping, the case took a dramatic turn. A man named John F. Condon received a letter from the kidnappers, offering to exchange the ransom for the child. Condon, a retired school teacher, became involved in the case, acting as an intermediary for the ransom exchange. The investigation continued to build momentum, and investigators began to focus on a suspect, Bruno Hauptmann, a German immigrant with a criminal history. After months of surveillance and investigation, Bruno Hauptmann was arrested on September 19, 1934, after the ransom money was traced to his residence. Hauptmann's involvement in the crime became clearer when it was discovered that he had used some of the ransom money to pay for a car and other personal items. Despite his denial, the evidence continued to mount against him. January 1935, New Jersey. The trial of Bruno Hauptmann began in January 1935. It was a media circus, attracting thousands of spectators and reporters from around the world. The courtroom was packed, and every detail of the trial was covered in newspapers, radio broadcasts, and newsreels. Hauptmann's defense team argued that he was innocent and had been framed. They claimed that the evidence was circumstantial and unreliable. A significant piece of evidence presented during the trial was the discovery of ransom money in Hauptmann's possession. Serial numbers from the bills were matched to those recorded during the ransom exchange. This direct connection between Hauptmann and the money was crucial in the prosecution's case. Hauptmann denied receiving the ransom money, but his defense could not explain how he came to possess it. As the trial continued, the courtroom drama unfolded. The prosecution presented eyewitnesses who testified to seeing Hauptmann near the Lindbergh estate. The defense attempted to discredit the witnesses, suggesting they were mistaken or lying. The prosecution also brought in handwriting experts to connect Hauptmann to the ransom notes. The drama in the courtroom intensified as each side presented their case. After weeks of testimony, the jury began deliberating. Tensions ran high as the world waited for the verdict. Was Hauptmann guilty of kidnapping and murder, or had he been wrongly convicted? After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict, and Hauptmann was sentenced to death by electrocution. On October 19, 1936, Bruno Hauptmann was executed by electrocution at New Jersey State Prison. His final words were reportedly, "I am innocent, but I am ready to die." The execution marked the tragic end to one of the most controversial cases in American criminal history. Despite his death, many believed Hauptmann was innocent, and the debate over his guilt or innocence continued long after his execution. The execution of Hauptmann sparked outrage and disbelief among many. Some believed the wrong man had been executed, while others were convinced of his guilt. The case became a media sensation, and people continued to debate Hauptmann's innocence or guilt for decades. Books, documentaries, and articles have been published over the years, exploring every angle of the case, keeping the mystery alive for future generations. As the years passed, more questions emerged regarding the investigation and trial. Was the evidence truly conclusive, or were mistakes made? Many experts questioned the validity of the ransom money evidence and the reliance on circumstantial evidence. In the years following Hauptmann's execution, new theories about the case began to surface, suggesting that there might have been an injustice. Over the years, public opinion about Hauptmann has remained divided. Some view him as a tragic figure who was wrongfully convicted, while others still believe in his guilt. The mystery surrounding his conviction and execution continues to fuel debate, with new theories about his innocence or guilt emerging regularly. Despite the official conviction, many questions remain unanswered in the Lindbergh baby case. Did the true kidnapper ever face justice? Were there flaws in the investigation or the trial that allowed an innocent man to be executed? The case continues to be a source of fascination and mystery for true crime enthusiasts and historians alike. On October 31, 2005, 25-year-old Teresa Halbach, a freelance photographer from Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, set off to photograph a vehicle for Auto Trader magazine at Stephen Avery's auto salvage yard in the town of Mishicote. Teresa had visited the Avery property before as part of her work and had a scheduled appointment with Stephen. This would be the last time she was ever seen alive. When she failed to return home or contact her family, they grew concerned and reported her missing on November 3, 2005. The search for Teresa quickly gained media attention. Family members, friends, and volunteers combed through areas around Avery's property, Authorities began their investigation, focusing on Stephen Avery, a man with a controversial past. Avery had been wrongly convicted of rape years earlier and exonerated by DNA evidence. Despite his exoneration, he remained a somewhat divisive figure in the town. As investigators searched, they found no immediate evidence linking Avery to Teresa's disappearance. On November 5, 2005, investigators made a breakthrough. They found Teresa Halbach's vehicle, a Toyota RAV4, abandoned on the Avery property, hidden in a remote area. The car was found with the license plate removed. This discovery raised alarm bells, as it suggested foul play. Blood was also found inside the vehicle, leading authorities to believe that Teresa had been harmed. This discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to shocking developments in the case. On November 9, 2005, Stephen Avery was arrested and charged with the murder of Teresa Halbach. The authorities believed that Avery had killed Teresa based on the evidence found on his property. His arrest was controversial considering his previous exoneration, and many in the community believed he was innocent. The case quickly garnered national attention, with media outlets speculating about his guilt or innocence. Avery denied the charges, maintaining his innocence. Stephen Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey, was also drawn into the investigation. Dassey, a 16-year-old high school student, was interrogated by police. During a lengthy and unrecorded interrogation, Dassey allegedly confessed to helping Avery murder Teresa Halbach. His confession, however, was riddled with inconsistencies and was later claimed to be coerced. Dassey's confession would become a central point in the case, and many believed it was made under duress. Investigators meticulously examined Avery's property and the surrounding area for any additional evidence. They found human remains in a burn pit on Avery's property, which they later confirmed belonged to Teresa Halbach. The discovery of the remains seemed to solidify the case against Avery. However, there were also questions about the handling of evidence, with some speculating that the police may have planted or tampered with evidence to ensure Avery's conviction. Stephen Avery's trial began in 2007. The prosecution presented the evidence gathered from his property, including Teresa's blood, her remains, and the car she was last seen in. They argued that Avery had killed Teresa and attempted to cover it up. The defense team, however, argued that Avery was being framed and that the evidence was manipulated. The trial captivated the nation, with many people divided over Avery's guilt or innocence. Brendan Dassey's trial took place in 2007 as well. The key piece of evidence in his case was his confession, which many argued was coerced. Despite his age and limited understanding of the situation, Dassey was convicted of first-degree murder, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. His conviction sparked outrage, with many believing that Dassey was a vulnerable teenager who had been manipulated into giving a false confession. After his conviction, Stephen Avery appealed the decision, maintaining that he was innocent. His defense team argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict him, and that his rights had been violated during the investigation and trial. The case gained international attention, with documentaries, books, and podcasts exploring the possibility that Avery had been wrongfully convicted once again. The question of whether Avery was truly guilty or the victim of a miscarriage of justice remained a hotly debated topic. The Avery family faced immense challenges during and after Stephen's trial. They stood by Stephen's innocence, but their lives were turned upside down by the media attention and public scrutiny. Teresa Halbach's family, meanwhile, was devastated by the loss of their daughter, and their grief became intertwined with the public debate over Avery's guilt or innocence. The tragic loss of Teresa and the ongoing legal battles created an atmosphere of tension and division in the small community. The case of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey became a media spectacle, particularly after the release of the Netflix documentary series, Making a Murderer, in 2015. The series painted a controversial picture of Avery's trial and conviction, questioning the integrity of law enforcement and the legal system. Public opinion became divided, with many people rallying behind Avery, believing he had been wrongfully convicted. The media influence on the case was undeniable, shaping how the public viewed the events and the people involved. The Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey case continues to spark intense debates about justice, the legal system, and the possibility of wrongful convictions. Supporters of Avery argue that he was the victim of a flawed system, while others believe that the evidence presented at trial was more than enough to convict him. The question of whether Brendan Dassey was coerced into his confession remains one of the most debated aspects of the case, with legal experts and the public divided on whether his confession should be admissible in court. Despite the years that have passed, the case remains a source of division and speculation. The Avery family's journey through the justice system has been marked by deep emotional and personal struggles. Stephen Avery's parents and siblings have had to endure the pain of watching a loved one face a legal battle while also grappling with public judgment. Teresa Halbach's family, on the other hand, has been forced to confront the tragic loss of a daughter and the very public nature of the case. The two families remain connected by the tragedy, but their experiences and perspectives on the case differ significantly. Public perception has played a crucial role in shaping the narrative surrounding the case. From the very beginning, the media spotlighted Stephen Avery's past and the possibility of his wrongful conviction, which drew a wave of public support for his case. Yet the same media also fueled skepticism about the investigation and the legal proceedings. This dichotomy has created an atmosphere where people continue to debate Avery's guilt or innocence. The case has left a lasting impact on the way people view the criminal justice system, especially in cases involving controversial suspects. As of today, the legal battle over Stephen Avery's conviction is far from over. Appeals continue to be filed, and the possibility of new evidence emerging remains a topic of great interest. Brendan Dassey's legal team has also pushed for his release, arguing that his conviction should be overturned due to the coerced confession. The case has sparked discussions on legal reforms, especially concerning the rights of defendants during interrogations and the integrity of confessions. For both families, the fight for justice seems to be an ongoing struggle that may take years to resolve. March 19, 2014, Maryland, USA, Caitlin Virts, a 16-year-old high school student, was reported missing by her mother, Bobby Jo Virts. The last time anyone had seen Caitlin was the night before when she had gone to bed, but by morning she was gone. Her phone went unanswered and her schoolwork was left untouched. Desperate, Bobby Jo contacted the police, fearing that something had happened to her daughter. The authorities were immediately concerned and launched an investigation. Police began their search by questioning Caitlin's friends, family, and anyone who might have seen her in the past 24 hours. Officers scoured the neighborhood, and investigators reached out to local media in hopes of finding any leads. The community rallied around the family, offering support, but as hours turned into days with no sign of Caitlin, the police began to fear the worst. The investigation took a dark turn when police discovered Caitlin's body in the trunk of her father's car. Timothy Virts, Caitlin's father, was the prime suspect. He had been questioned but initially appeared to be a grieving parent. However, the police found disturbing evidence that suggested Caitlin had been murdered before her body was placed in the car. Timothy Virts had been acting strangely since his daughter's disappearance. He had initially cooperated with the police investigation, but soon became evasive and began to show signs of nervousness. Police learned that the father and daughter had an increasingly strained relationship. Neighbors recalled hearing loud arguments between the two in the days leading up to Caitlin's death. After being confronted with the evidence, Timothy Virts broke down and confessed to killing his daughter. He claimed that the murder was a result of a violent argument between them. In his confession, he detailed how he strangled Caitlin and then hid her body in the trunk of his car. The police were shocked by the brutality of the crime, and the family was left devastated by the revelation. After his confession, Timothy Virts fled with his younger daughter Delaney to avoid arrest. The police immediately issued an Amber Alert and began searching for the two. Delaney's whereabouts were unknown, and authorities feared for her safety. The community rallied to assist in the search, but as hours passed, the anxiety surrounding Delaney's fate only deepened. As the search for Timothy and Delaney Virts intensified, law enforcement agencies across the country joined the manhunt. FBI agents, local police, and federal authorities worked together, spreading the search to neighboring states. Delaney's disappearance added a layer of urgency to the case, and the nation became gripped by the haunting image of a father fleeing with his child. The breakthrough in the case came when a tip led authorities to a Greyhound bus station in Missouri. Timothy and Delaney Virts were spotted at the station, attempting to catch a bus. Police acted quickly, arresting Timothy and rescuing Delaney, who was unharmed but traumatized by the ordeal. Timothy Virts was taken into custody without incident and was transported back to Maryland. Upon his arrival, he was formally charged with the murder of his daughter, Caitlin. The news of his capture brought a brief sense of relief to the community, but the pain of Caitlin's death lingered. As Timothy Virts was interrogated further, the police began to uncover more details about the events leading up to Caitlin's death. Investigators learned that there had been a history of domestic disputes in the Virts household, with Timothy often arguing with his children and ex-wife. Caitlin's murder seemed to be the culmination of years of escalating tension. April 2014, Maryland, USA, Timothy Virts was brought before the court to face charges of first-degree murder. The courtroom was filled with grief-stricken family members, friends, and the public, all eager to see justice served. Timothy appeared cold and distant as the evidence against him was laid bare, with many struggling to understand how a father could murder his own child. Delaney Virts was called to testify in court. Although she was only 7 years old, her testimony was crucial in understanding what happened that night. She spoke tearfully about how her father had forced her to leave with him after Caitlin's death, but she was too young to fully comprehend the horror of what had occurred. Timothy Virts' defense attorneys attempted to argue that he was not in his right mind at the time of the murder, suggesting that he had been suffering from severe emotional distress. However, the prosecution countered with evidence that showed his behavior before and after Caitlin's death was calculated and deliberate. After weeks of deliberation, the jury found Timothy Virts guilty of first-degree murder. The decision was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Caitlin's family members broke down in tears, finally finding justice for the young girl whose life had been tragically cut short. June 2014, Maryland, USA, Timothy Virts was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge expressed the severity of the crime, noting that the loss of Caitlin's life was a senseless tragedy. Caitlin's mother, Bobby Jo, spoke in court, expressing her grief and vowing to honor her daughter's memory. The loss of Caitlin had a devastating impact on her family. Bobby Jo struggled with feelings of guilt and anger, questioning whether there was anything she could have done to save her daughter. Delaney, too, faced long-term emotional scars from witnessing the events and being part of the tragic ordeal. In the months following Caitlin's death, the community rallied together to honor her memory. Memorials and fundraising events were held to support the Virts family, with many local residents coming forward to express their grief and solidarity. Though healing was slow, the community remained strong in the face of such a heartbreaking tragedy. Caitlin Virts' murder sent shockwaves across the nation. People were horrified by the idea of a father killing his own daughter, and it sparked debates about domestic violence and child protection. The case was widely covered in the media, and many viewers were left grappling with the question of how such a horrific act could occur within a family. Psychologists began to analyze the psychological effects of the case, particularly on Delaney, who had been forced to flee with her father. Many questioned how a child could grow up in a home filled with violence, and the emotional trauma Delaney experienced would affect her for years to come. Caitlin Virts' story remains a tragic reminder of the devastating effects of domestic violence. Her family continues to advocate for children's safety and well-being, and Caitlin's legacy lives on through those who continue to fight for justice in the face of such horrifying acts. In the summer of 2008, 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony disappeared from her home in Orlando, Florida. Her mother, Casey Anthony, failed to report her missing for over a month. Instead, Casey told relatives and friends that Kaylee was with a nanny. But no one had seen the nanny and the child was nowhere to be found. The situation quickly caught the attention of local authorities, as Casey's inconsistent story raised suspicions. A missing child case turned into a media frenzy, with the public eager for answers. Was Kaylee kidnapped, or was there something more sinister behind her disappearance? As the investigation into Kaylee's disappearance began, Casey's statements became increasingly inconsistent. She first claimed that her daughter had been with a nanny, but when questioned further, her story started to unravel. Casey's mother, Cindy Anthony, was the one who called 911 after discovering that Kaylee was missing. In a frantic phone call, Cindy described how Casey had been acting strangely and how her daughter hadn't been home for a month. With her story falling apart, Casey became the primary suspect in the case. On December 11, 2008, 6 months after Kaylee's disappearance, investigators made a shocking discovery. The skeletal remains of Kaylee were found in a wooded area near the Anthony family home. The discovery came after a search of the area that had already been combed multiple times before. The body was badly decomposed, but forensic analysis confirmed it was indeed Kaylee. This discovery turned the case from a missing persons investigation to a homicide investigation. The public was stunned, but many had already suspected the worst. Shortly after Kaylee's remains were discovered, Casey Anthony was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. Authorities were convinced that Casey had played a direct role in her daughter's death. Casey initially maintained her innocence, but her behavior was telling. She had been seen partying and living a carefree lifestyle during the weeks after Kaylee's disappearance. Her arrest, coupled with the mounting evidence, shocked the community and the media alike. The trial of Casey Anthony began in May 2011. The prosecution argued that Casey had intentionally killed her daughter and tried to cover it up. They presented evidence that showed Casey's lack of concern for her missing child, including her partying and attempts to cover up the crime. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Kaylee's death was accidental and that Casey was not responsible. The trial quickly became a media spectacle, with millions watching every move of the accused. The prosecution presented a compelling case, using forensic evidence to suggest that Kaylee's death was not an accident. The most damning piece of evidence was the discovery of a strand of hair that matched Kaylee's in the trunk of Casey's car. This was seen as evidence that Kaylee had been placed in the trunk, possibly after her death. Other evidence, such as Casey's internet searches about how to make chloroform, also suggested foul play. However, despite the evidence, the prosecution could not definitively prove that Casey had killed Kaylee. The defense team painted a different picture of what had happened to Kaylee. They argued that Kaylee's death was accidental, possibly due to drowning in the family pool. They suggested that Casey had been in denial and was too scared to report the accident. They also highlighted Casey's troubled childhood and complex relationship with her family, attempting to explain her behavior. The defense sought to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury, hoping to avoid a conviction for murder. After weeks of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury began deliberating. The prosecution and defense had each presented their case, but now it was up to the jury to decide Casey's fate. The public anxiously waited for the verdict. The case had captivated the nation, and people were divided. Some believed Casey was guilty, while others thought she was simply a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Would justice be served, or would Casey walk free? On July 5, 2011, after just 11 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Casey Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The verdict shocked many. While Casey was acquitted of the most serious charge, the jury still found her guilty of lying to authorities during the investigation. It was a decision that sparked outrage, as many felt justice had not been served. Following the verdict, the aftermath of the case was felt across the country. Casey's acquittal sparked heated debates about the criminal justice system and the role of public opinion in high-profile cases. Some believed that the system had failed Kaylee, while others argued that the prosecution had not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Casey became a polarizing figure, and her life after the trial remained under intense scrutiny. The case also left a lasting impact on the way the media covers criminal trials. The public outrage following the verdict was immense. Many people believed that Casey had gotten away with murder and that Kaylee had not received justice. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, with signs demanding justice for the little girl. The media, too, was divided. Some praised the verdict as a triumph of justice, while others decried it as a miscarriage of justice. The case became a point of contention for years to come, with debates about the fairness of the trial still ongoing. In the years following the trial, Casey Anthony's life continued to be under a microscope. She lived in seclusion, avoiding public attention as much as possible. She gave a few interviews but remained largely silent. People were fascinated by her, yet many still saw her as a murderer who had escaped justice. Despite her acquittal, Casey's life was far from normal. She was haunted by the legacy of the case and would never be able to live a quiet life without being judged by the public. Years after the trial, debates surrounding the case continue to spark intense discussions. The question of whether Casey Anthony was guilty of murder remains unanswered in the eyes of many. Some believe the jury made the right call, while others feel that justice was never truly served. Documentaries, books, and articles have kept the case alive, ensuring that it remains a part of the cultural conversation. The controversy surrounding Casey Anthony will likely never fully fade. The legacy of the Caylee Anthony case is undeniable. It left an indelible mark on the criminal justice system and how high-profile cases are handled. It also raised important questions about the media's role in influencing public opinion during criminal trials. While the truth about Caylee's death may never be fully known, the case remains a significant chapter in American legal history. Caylee Anthony's story is a tragic one, filled with mystery, heartbreak, and unanswered questions. A young life lost far too soon, and a mother who will forever be associated with her daughter's disappearance. While some still fight for justice for Caylee, the case has become a symbol of the complexities of the justice system. No matter the outcome, the case will always remind us of the importance of protecting our children and ensuring justice is served,